The Late War is an interesting phase in the game Twilight Struggle. The cards that are added are likely the least familiar to players, as many games don't go all the way to the end, and are often resolved by the mid-war. This video will give you some late war strategy ideas here on Legendary Tactics. Most games of Twilight Struggle end sooner than turn 10, so when the late war cards are shuffled in after turn 7, it isn't unusual for players to be unfamiliar with the cards of this deck. After all, because the cards are shuffled into a larger deck, many of them won't even come out before the end of the game, and they certainly can't be counted on to appear. The late war deck is not a huge one, only 23 cards, which add a total of 62 ops. Each side gets 10 cards, and there are 3 neutral ones. Of the neutral ones, 2 of them are 2-op cards and 1 of them is a 4-op. Of the American cards, 3 of them are 2-op cards, 6 are 3-op cards, and only 1 is a 4-op card. For the Soviets, 5 of the 10 are 2-op cards, 4 are 3-op cards, and 1 is a 4-op card. One of the best tips I can give you about the late war is to take the time to learn the effects of the late war cards. Because many games end either in the mid-war or early in the late war phase of the game, most of your opponents will be unfamiliar with the cards in this deck. Thus, if you take the time to familiarize yourself with them, both so you know what you can expect and so you can take advantage of your opponent's ignorance and bad study habits, and if you learn some strategies around each of the cards, it does give you a measurable advantage. Arguably, the most important card of the late war is the War Games event card. Obviously, this can only be used in specific circumstances, but you must be aware of its possible play. And unfortunately, you must always assume the worst, that your opponent has this card in hand. If you're greatly behind, the game can literally end any second, and even if it has already gone by and sits in the discard, cards like Star Wars or Assault Negotiations can bring it back. If you are already winning, obviously you're going to want to push the victory margin up, so winning by War Games is a very real possibility, if you're lucky enough to draw it. In the original version of Twilight Struggle, Aldrich Ames was an overpowered card, so if you happen to be playing that version, be supremely aware of it. The remix version is more manageable and, while annoying, is nothing to fear. That said, it might be the best late war headline event for the Soviet side. The other thing to remember in the late war is that the situation in Europe is much more vulnerable to change. As things tend to get pretty locked down there after the first or second turn, don't be complacent, especially as the US events like Tear Down This Wall, a supercharged East European unrest, and Solidarity will make it tougher to maintain your control of Eastern Europe. Chernobyl can also be quite devastating in the right circumstance. As a US player, don't forget about the Reformer-Glasnost combo, which is your biggest threat when it comes to European dominance in the late war. The good news is that a Reformer card sent to space at this point will be very unlikely to return, meaning that the Glasnost event will be largely mitigated. Outside of Europe, Asia will remain much as it had before, as there are no events that directly impact that region. The Middle East will likely remain mostly Soviet-held, or will become a lot harder to hold if you are the US. Cards like Iranian hostage crisis, Marine barracks bombing, and potentially Iran-Iraq war, coupled with Muslim revolution and other events from the mid-war, make it extremely expensive, if not supremely tricky, to maintain any sort of grip on the Middle East. Again, Israel will be your sanctuary and your minimum presence in the region, especially as Arab-Israeli war is likely prevented by then by Camp David Accords. In the rest of the world, players will be attempting to consolidate their positions as both players begin to take final scoring into consideration. Africa and Central and South America will likely be the center of most of the activity, with realignments, influence placement, and the occasional coup being the order of the day. There are some events that can affect things here a bit, like the Iron Lady, Latin American debt crisis, and Ortega elected in Nicaragua, but nothing too major. Just remember that Ortega elected in Nicaragua is a DEFCON suicide card if the US has influence in Cuba. In the late war, you will have to do the math a few times, region by region, to make sure that you have and can maintain domination or even control. The last turn will be all about doing what you can to shift the scoring regions to your side at the last minute or protecting what you have. The US, having the last turn of the game in most cases, will have an advantage at game end. The American player can make their last action round into a very powerful scoring play, so plan for that. Plan an event or high ops play that will swing a region in your favor, or take your opponent down a peg. The USSR should plan for that as well, as a card like Quagmire is perfect for the Soviet last turn if it's available, thereby taking away that sizable US advantage. Good luck, hopefully you will be victorious. This is Legendary Tactics.